The letters arrived in a leather pouch, tied with twine and sealed with wax the color of dried roses, and Jonas Callahan knew before he even opened the first one that his life in these mountains would never be the same. He had been living alone in the Colorado Rockies for nearly 8 years by the spring of 1877, a solitary existence that suited him after the war had taken too much from him. His cabin sat nestled in a valley where the pine trees grew so thick they blocked out the sun for hours at a time, and the nearest town, Redemption Falls, was a 2-day ride through treacherous terrain. He preferred it that way. People asked too many questions, wanted too much, needed things he could no longer give. But the mountains asked for nothing except respect and vigilance, and Jonas had plenty of both. The mailman who brought the letters was a wiry fellow named Tucker, who made the route once every 6 weeks when weather permitted. He looked at Jonas with something between pity and curiosity as he handed over the leather pouch, along with a few other items Jonas had ordered from the general store. "Package came for you from back east," Tucker said, adjusting his hat against the morning sun. "Philadelphia, looks like. You got family there?" Jonas took the pouch, feeling the weight of it in his calloused hands. "No family anywhere," he said, which was true enough. His parents were long dead. His brother had fallen at Gettysburg, and the woman he had planned to marry had chosen someone else when he came back from the war, changed and hollow. Tucker nodded, understanding that some questions were best left unasked in these mountains. He tipped his hat and rode off, leaving Jonas alone with the mysterious package. Inside the cabin, with the fire crackling and coffee brewing in the tin pot, Jonas opened the pouch. There were 12 letters inside, each one written in elegant script on cream-colored paper. The handwriting was distinctly feminine, careful and deliberate, with loops and flourishes that spoke of education and refinement. He picked up the first letter, dated March 1876, and began to read. "Dear Mr. Callahan," it began, "my name is Eleanor Hartwick, and I am writing to you at the suggestion of Reverend Matthews of Redemption Falls, who has assured me that you are a man of good character and sound reputation, despite your preference for solitude. I find myself in a situation that requires a rather unusual solution, and I hope you will forgive my forwardness in approaching you this way." Jonas sat down in his chair, the only comfortable piece of furniture in the sparse cabin, and continued reading. Eleanor Hartwick explained that she was 24 years old, a schoolteacher in Philadelphia, and that circumstances beyond her control were forcing her to leave the city. Her father had died 2 years prior, leaving debts that her modest salary could not cover. Her landlord had made advances that grew increasingly aggressive, and her options were running dangerously thin. She had heard of the West, of opportunities for women willing to work hard and start fresh, and Reverend Matthews, a distant cousin of her late mother, had suggested she might find safety and employment in Redemption Falls. But Eleanor was practical. She knew that a woman alone in a frontier town would face challenges and dangers of a different kind. She had seen advertisements for mail-order brides, had heard stories of women who went west to marry men they had never met, and while the idea seemed radical, it also seemed like the most honest solution to her predicament. YTE. "I am not writing to ask you to marry me," she clarified in the letter. "I am writing to ask if you would consider the possibility, should we find ourselves compatible through correspondence. Reverend Matthews speaks highly of you, and he assures me that you would treat a wife with respect and kindness, which is more than I can say for most men of my acquaintance here in Philadelphia. I understand you value your solitude, and I would not wish to impose upon that. But perhaps we might write to one another for a time, and see if an arrangement could be made that would suit us both." Jonas read the letter 3 times that first night, studying the words, trying to understand the woman behind them. She was educated, that much was clear. Her language was formal but not stiff, and there was a warmth beneath the propriety that appealed to him. She was also desperate, though she tried to hide it. He recognized the careful pride in her words, the way she framed her proposal as something mutual rather than begging for rescue. He should have thrown the letters in the fire. He should have ignored them, let them sit unanswered, allowed Eleanor Hartwick to find some other solution to her problems. But instead, he opened the second letter. This one was dated April 1876, a month after the first, and it was longer. Eleanor had taken his silence as permission to continue writing, and she told him more about herself. She described her work at the school, teaching children from the crowded tenements how to read and write. She wrote about her love of books, particularly poetry and adventure stories. She mentioned that she could cook well enough, though she had never baked bread outdoors or prepared wild game. She admitted she had never seen a mountain in person, only in paintings, and wondered if they were as magnificent as artists claimed. "I imagine you must think me foolish," she wrote. "A city woman with no practical skills for frontier life, proposing to move across the country to live in the wilderness with a man she has never met. And perhaps you would be right. But I have always believed that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. I am afraid, Mr. Callahan, but I'm more afraid of staying here, of becoming someone I do not recognize, of losing the parts of myself that I value most." Jonas found himself reading that letter 7 times before moving on to the third. The letters continued through the months, each one revealing more of Eleanor's character. In May, she wrote about her childhood, growing up as the only daughter of a shopkeeper who had valued education above all else. In June, she described the city in summer, the oppressive heat and the smell of too many people living too close together. In July, she wrote about her decision to leave, how she had sold most of her possessions and was saving every penny for the journey west. "I have told Reverend Matthews that I plan to arrive in Redemption Falls next spring," she wrote in August. "He has secured a position for me at the town school, should I need it. But I confess, Mr. Callahan, that I hope I might not need it. I hope that through these letters we might come to know one another well enough that you would consider taking me as your wife. I know this is presumptuous. I know I have no right to hope for such a thing when you have not written me a single word in return. But hope is sometimes all we have, and I choose to hold on to it." Jonas read that letter by firelight, his coffee growing cold in his cup. He should write back. He should tell her not to come, that he was not the man she imagined, that life in these mountains would break her spirit within a month. But he did not write. Instead, he opened the next letter. September brought a shorter note, more uncertain. "I wonder if my letters are reaching you," Eleanor wrote, "or perhaps they are, and you simply have no interest in responding. I would not blame you. You did not ask for this correspondence, and you owe me nothing. But still, I write. Perhaps because putting these words on paper makes me feel less alone. Perhaps because imagining you reading them somewhere in those distant mountains gives me courage to face each day here." October's letter was longer again and filled with questions. She asked about his life, his daily routine, what he did to pass the long winter months. She asked if he ever felt lonely, if he missed the company of other people, if he ever regretted his isolation. She asked what kind of woman he might want, if he wanted one at all. I am not beautiful," she wrote with stark honesty. "I am tall for a woman, nearly 5 feet and 8 inches, with brown hair that refuses to hold a curl and gray eyes that my father always said were too serious. I am thin, perhaps too thin, and my hands are ink-stained from years of teaching. I am not graceful or particularly charming, but I am loyal, and I am kind, and I work hard at everything I undertake. If those qualities have any value to you, then perhaps I am not entirely without merit." Jonas traced the words with his finger, imagining this tall, serious woman with gray eyes and ink-stained hands. He had read the letter 11 times by the time he finally fell asleep that night. November brought news that Eleanor had given notice at her school and at her boarding house. "I leave in April," she wrote. "The journey will take several weeks, perhaps longer, depending on conditions. I will travel by train as far as possible, then by stage. Reverend Matthews has arranged for accommodations along the way and has written to contacts in various towns to ensure my safety. I am terrified, Mr. Callahan, but I am also more certain than ever that this is what I must do. Whether you wish to marry me or not, I am coming west. I'm coming to make a new life, to find out what kind of woman I can be when I am not trapped by circumstances and fear." Jonas read that letter 20 times. He paced his cabin, argued with himself, nearly started a letter in response a dozen times, but the words would not come. What could he say? That he was a broken man who had seen too much death, that he woke most nights in a cold sweat, reliving battles that should have stayed buried, that he had chosen these mountains precisely because they demanded nothing of him except survival? December's letter arrived in a new leather pouch, this one accompanied by a small package wrapped in brown paper. Jonas opened the letter first, Eleanor wrote about Christmas in the city, the decorated shop windows and the church services, the loneliness of celebrating alone. She wrote about packing her few remaining possessions, about the mixture of excitement and terror that kept her awake at night. "I have enclosed a gift," she wrote. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have something from me, whether you choose to acknowledge these letters or not. I suppose I wanted to feel, even for a moment, as though I were giving something to someone who mattered. And you do matter, Mr. Callahan, even though we have never met. You matter because you represent possibility, because somewhere in those mountains you are living a life of your own choosing, and that gives me hope that I might do the same." Inside the brown paper was a carefully knitted scarf, dark blue wool with a simple pattern. Jonas held it in his hands, feeling the softness of it, imagining Eleanor working on it by lamplight in her boarding house room. He wrapped it around his neck, and it fit perfectly. He read that letter 30 times over the next month. January 1877 brought a shorter letter written in a slightly shaky hand. "I am ill," Eleanor wrote. "Nothing serious, the doctor assures me, just a winter cold that has lingered. But it has made me think about mortality, about the fragility of our plans and hopes. What if I do not make it west? What if something happens on the journey? I find I am not afraid of dying, Mr. Callahan, but I am afraid of dying without having truly lived, without having seen those mountains, without having known freedom even for a little while." Jonas nearly saddled his horse that night, nearly rode the 2 days to Redemption Falls to send a telegram. But what would he say? He was not good with words, had never been, and the war had made him even worse. So instead, he waited for the next letter. It arrived in February, and Eleanor's handwriting was stronger again. "I am recovered," she wrote with obvious relief, and more determined than ever. "I leave Philadelphia on April 15th. I should arrive in Redemption Falls by mid-May, assuming no significant delays. I do not know what I will find when I get there. I do not know if you will meet me, or if you will remain in your mountains undisturbed by the foolish hopes of a city woman who wrote you 12 letters over the course of a year. But I will be there, Mr. Callahan. And if you have read any of these letters, if any part of you is even slightly curious, I hope you will come to town. I hope I will finally meet the man I have been writing to all these months." The final letter, dated March 1877, was the shortest. "I am packed. I am ready. In 4 weeks I will begin the journey that will change my life forever. I am not the same woman who wrote that first letter to you a year ago. These months of writing to you, of imagining a different life, have changed me. I am stronger now, more certain of myself. Whether we ever meet or not, I want to thank you for that, for being the idea that kept me going through the darkest times, for being the hope that made me brave. I will see you in May, Mr. Callahan, or I will not, but either way, I will be free." Jonas sat in his cabin with all 12 letters spread out before him on the rough wooden table he had built with his own hands. He had read each one at least 7 times, some many more than that. He knew Eleanor's handwriting as well as his own, could recite passages from memory. He knew about her father's shop, about the children she taught, about her favorite poems and her fear of heights, and her hope for a life that meant something. And he knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that he could not let her arrive in Redemption Falls without being there to meet her. The decision made, Jonas spent the next 6 weeks preparing. He cleaned his cabin more thoroughly than he had in years, repaired the shutters in the door, replaced the worn bearskin on his bed with a newer one. He rode to Redemption Falls and bought supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, fabric for curtains, a second chair, a proper wash basin. The shopkeeper, a shrewd woman named Mrs. Patterson, raised her eyebrows at his purchases but said nothing. He also bought paper and ink, and he spent 3 agonizing nights trying to write a letter to Eleanor. But everything he wrote seemed wrong, inadequate. How could he explain his year of silence? How could he tell her that her letters had become the most important part of his solitary existence, that he had read them until the pages grew soft from handling? In the end, he decided he would tell her in person, if she would listen. May arrived with warm sunshine and mountain wildflowers blooming in impossible colors across the meadows. Jonas washed himself in the cold stream behind his cabin, trimmed his beard, and put on his cleanest shirt. He looked at himself in the small, cracked mirror he kept for shaving, and saw a man who looked older than his 32 years. The war and the mountains had carved lines into his face, and his dark hair, which hung past his shoulders, was already showing threads of gray, but his body was strong from years of hard work, his shoulders broad and his arms corded with muscle from chopping wood and hunting and building everything he needed to survive. He looked like what he was, a mountain man, rough and weathered and alone. What would Eleanor Hartwick, educated and refined, think when she saw him? The ride to Redemption Falls took him 2 days, as always. He camped overnight in a canyon he knew well, where the walls sheltered him from the wind and a spring provided fresh water. He did not sleep much, too aware that tomorrow he would meet the woman whose words had haunted him for a year. Redemption Falls was a small town, barely more than a collection of wooden buildings along a single main street, but it was growing. Gold had been found in the nearby mountains 5 years earlier, and while the initial rush had faded, enough remained to keep the town alive. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, a small hotel, a blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses. The school was a newer building at the edge of town, built the previous year when enough families had settled in the area to make it necessary. Jonas arrived on May 16th, according to the calendar Mrs. Patterson kept in the general store. The stagecoach from Denver was due that afternoon. He stabled his horse at the livery, paying for 2 days in advance, and then found himself at a loss. He could not remember the last time he had felt nervous. Even in the war, facing enemy fire, he had been calm, focused. But now, waiting to meet a woman who had written him 12 letters, he felt his heart pounding against his ribs. Reverend Matthews found him standing outside the church, looking as uncomfortable as Jonas felt. The Reverend was a kind-faced man in his 50s, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a gentle manner that had served him well in this rough town. "Jonas Callahan," the Reverend said, extending his hand. "I heard you were in town. I wondered if you might come." Jonas shook his hand, his own grip careful despite his strength. "She wrote me letters," he said, because he did not know how else to explain. Reverend Matthews nodded, understanding. "Eleanor is a remarkable young woman. I'm glad you came. She has been hoping, though she tried not to show it in her letters to me." "I never wrote back," Jonas admitted, the shame of it heavy in his chest. "But you read her letters," the Reverend said. It was not a question. "Everyone! Multiple times." "Then you know her better than most men know their wives after years of marriage," the Reverend said gently. "Words on paper can reveal truths that people hide in person. She knows that, which is why she wrote so honestly." Jonas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The stagecoach arrived at 3 p.m, rattling into town in a cloud of dust. Jonas stood near the general store, trying to appear casual, his heart hammering so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Several people disembarked, a merchant he recognized from previous trips to town, a couple with 2 children, and finally, a tall woman in a gray traveling dress that had seen better days. Eleanor Hartwick stepped down from the stage with careful dignity, despite the obvious exhaustion on her face. She was exactly as she had described herself, tall and thin, with brown hair pulled back in a simple style, and eyes that were indeed too serious for her age. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense, but there was something arresting about her face, a strength and intelligence that made beauty seem irrelevant. She looked around the town with those serious gray eyes, taking in the rough buildings and the rougher people, and Jonas saw her square her shoulders as if preparing for battle. Then, her gaze found Reverend Matthews, and relief flooded her features. "Reverend," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its soft tone, "thank you for meeting me." "Eleanor, my dear," the Reverend said warmly, taking her hands, "welcome to Redemption Falls. How was your journey?" "Long," she admitted with a tired smile, "but I am here, which is what matters." "There is someone I would like you to meet," the Reverend said, and turned to gesture at Jonas. Eleanor followed his gaze, and her eyes widened slightly when she saw Jonas. He stepped forward, acutely aware of how he must appear to her, massive and rough, with his long hair and weathered face, his buckskin jacket and worn boots. He was used to people being intimidated by his size, by the way he moved like a predator even when he was trying to be gentle. But Eleanor did not look frightened. She looked at him with those serious eyes, studying him the way he imagined she studied books, trying to understand what she was seeing. And then, slowly, understanding dawned. "Mr. Callahan," she breathed. "Miss Hartwick, he said, and was relieved that his voice came out steady. "I got your letters." For a moment she just stared at him, and Jonas could not read her expression. Then, to his surprise, her eyes filled with tears. "You came," she whispered. "I thought perhaps you had not received them, or that you did not want to, but you came." "I read every one," Jonas said, taking a step closer. "Some of them 7 times or more. I should have written back. I'm not good with words, and I did not know what to say, but I read them, and I remembered every word." Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth, visibly struggling with her emotions. "I cannot believe you are real," she said finally. "I've imagined this moment for so long, but I never truly believed it would happen." Jonas wanted to reach out to her, to offer some comfort, but he was not sure if she would welcome his touch. So instead, he said, "You wrote that you were not beautiful. You were wrong." Eleanor laughed, a watery sound that was half sob. "I wrote a great many things. Did you truly read them all?" "About your father's shop," Jonas said, "about teaching the children from the tenements, about poetry and adventure stories and how you had never seen a mountain, about being afraid but choosing courage anyway, about wanting to be free." Fresh tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, but she was smiling now. "You did read them," she whispered. "You really did." "I have them all in my cabin," Jonas said. "I have read them so many times the pages are soft. They were the only company I wanted this past year." "I have traveled 2,000 miles to meet you," Eleanor said, wiping at her tears. "And now that I am here, I do not know what to say." "You wrote that you hoped I might consider taking you as my wife," Jonas said, his heart thundering. "That offer still stand?" Eleanor stared at him, her eyes wide. "You want to marry me? But you do not know me. Not really. Letters are just words." "I know that you are brave," Jonas said. "I know that you are kind and loyal and honest. I know that you work hard and that you value freedom above comfort. I know that you have a good heart and that you are willing to take a risk on a broken man living alone in the mountains. That is more than most people know about each other when they marry." "You think you are broken?" Eleanor asked softly. Jonas nodded, unable to lie to her. "The war took things from me. I chose the mountains because I did not want to inflict my damage on anyone else." "And yet you came to meet me anyway," Eleanor said. "That does not sound like a broken man. That sounds like a brave one." They stood there in the middle of the street, staring at each other, the rest of the town forgotten. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," he suggested. "Eleanor, you must be exhausted from your journey." Eleanor nodded, but her eyes never left Jonas. "I am exhausted," she admitted, "but I am also more awake than I have been in years." Jonas made a decision. "Marry me," he said. "Now, today. Then come home with me to the mountains. I cannot promise you an easy life, but I can promise you safety and respect and a chance at that freedom you wrote about." Eleanor took a shaky breath. "That's a rather rushed proposal, Mr. Callahan." "Jonas," he said, "and you have had a year to think about it. So have I. I am done thinking." "I just arrived," Eleanor said, but there was hope in her voice. "Should we not take some time to get to know each other in person, to make sure we are truly compatible?" "I'm leaving tomorrow morning," Jonas said. "I do not like being away from the mountains for long. You can stay here, take the position at the school, and we can court properly if that is what you want. But I am asking you to take the risk, to marry me today and come home with me tomorrow, to find out together if we can build something in those mountains." "That is madness," Eleanor whispered. "Yes," Jonas agreed, "but you wrote that courage is acting despite fear. And I am asking you to be courageous one more time." Eleanor looked at Reverend Matthews, who smiled gently. "I can perform the ceremony today if you wish," he said. "But Eleanor, my dear, you should only do this if you truly want to. You have a position here, a place to stay. You do not have to rush into anything." Eleanor turned back to Jonas, studying his face. "If I say yes, will you promise me something?" "If I can," Jonas said. "Promise me that you will talk to me," Eleanor said. "Not just now, but always. You say you are not good with words, but you are better than you think. I need to know that you will not retreat into silence the way you did this past year." Jonas considered this. It would be hard, harder than anything physical he had ever done, but he nodded. I will try. I cannot promise I will always find the right words, but I will try to speak them anyway." "Then yes," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Yes, I will marry you, Jonas Callahan. Today, if you will have me." The wedding took place 2 hours later in the small church, with Reverend Matthews officiating and Mrs. Patterson and her husband standing as witnesses. Eleanor wore the same gray traveling dress, and Jonas wore the same rough clothes, but when they spoke their vows, the words felt more real than anything Jonas had experienced in years. "I, Jonas Callahan, take you, Eleanor Hartwick, to be my wife. I promise to protect you and provide for you, to respect your freedom and value your company, to try to be the man you imagined when you wrote those letters. I, Eleanor Hartwick, take you, Jonas Callahan, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you, to make a home in the mountains, to face whatever comes with courage and hope, to be the woman you deserve." When Reverend Matthews pronounced them married, Jonas carefully took Eleanor's hands in his, aware of how small they seemed against his own calloused palms. Her hands were indeed ink-stained, just as she had written, and he found the sight of those stains oddly endearing. "May I kiss you?" he asked, because despite everything they were still strangers in so many ways. "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "Please." Jonas kissed her carefully, gently, a brush of lips that promised more without demanding it. Eleanor leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, and Jonas felt something long frozen inside him begin to thaw. They spent their wedding night in the small room Eleanor had reserved at the hotel, and Jonas was grateful for the privacy, for the chance to simply talk without the eyes of the town on them. They sat together on the edge of the narrow bed, still fully clothed, and talked until the candle burned low. "Tell me about your cabin," Eleanor said. "I want to be able to picture it." So Jonas described it. The single room with the stone fireplace, the rough furniture he had built himself, the way the morning light came through the window to wake him, the sounds of the forest all around. He told her about the stream where he got water, the meadow where deer came to graze, the high peaks visible from his door. "It sounds beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "Lonely, but beautiful." "It was lonely," Jonas admitted, "until your letters came. Then it was different. I would read them by the fire at night, and it felt like you were there with me." "I felt the same way when I was writing them," Eleanor confessed, "like I was talking to you, even though I had never heard your voice. Is that strange?" "No stranger than any of this," Jonas said with a slight smile. "We just got married, and we met 6 hours ago." "Technically, we met a year ago," Eleanor said, "just on paper instead of in person." She yawned, covering her mouth with her hand, and Jonas stood. "You should sleep. We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." "Where will you sleep?" Eleanor asked. "I can get another room or sleep in the stable," Jonas said. "I do not want to make you uncomfortable." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said, "We are married. You can stay here. But Jonas, I need to tell you something." He waited, and she took a breath. "I have never been with a man. My landlord tried, which is part of why I left, but I never allowed it. I do not know what you expect from this marriage, but I need time. I need to know you better before I can be a proper wife to you in that way." Jonas felt a wave of relief. "I do not expect anything," he said honestly. "We will take our time. There is no rush." "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, "for understanding." They lay down together on top of the blankets, both still fully dressed with a careful distance between them. But before she fell asleep, Eleanor reached out and took Jonas's hand, lacing her fingers through his. I am glad you came to meet me," she murmured, already half asleep. "I am glad you read my letters." Jonas squeezed her hand gently. "So am I." He lay awake long after Eleanor's breathing had deepened into sleep, watching the shadows move across the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning, he had been alone. Tonight, he was married to a woman who had crossed a continent to meet him, based on nothing but letters and hope. It should have terrified him. Instead, he felt something he had not felt in 8 years. Peace. They left Redemption Falls at dawn the next morning. Jonas had purchased a second horse for Eleanor, a gentle mare that Mrs. Patterson assured him had a calm temperament. Eleanor had one trunk with her belongings, which Jonas secured behind his saddle. "Have you ridden much?" he asked as he helped her mount. Some when I was younger, Eleanor said, though never for long distances. We will take it slow, Jonas promised. 2 days to the cabin, but we can stop whenever you need to rest. Eleanor nodded, settling into the saddle with reasonable competence. She wore a practical riding skirt Mrs. Patterson had sold her, and her hair was braided simply down her back. In the morning light, with the mountains rising behind her, she looked like she belonged here already. They rode out of town together, and Jonas felt the familiar tension in his shoulders ease as the buildings fell away behind them. This was his territory, his world, and having Eleanor beside him felt right in a way he could not explain. The ride into the mountains was slow and careful. Jonas led them along game trails and through valleys he knew like the back of his hand, pointing out landmarks and explaining the terrain. Eleanor watched everything with wide eyes, taking in the massive pines, the rushing streams, the way the mountains seemed to touch the sky. It's so vast, she breathed during one of their rest stops, and so quiet, I can hear my own heartbeat. You get used to the quiet, Jonas said. After a while, the city sounds would probably drive you mad. They already did, Eleanor said with a slight smile. That is why I left. They made camp that first night in a protected canyon, and Jonas showed Eleanor how he set up his simple camp. Where to place the fire, how to secure the horses, how to arrange the bedrolls for maximum warmth and comfort. She watched carefully, asking questions, trying to learn. I am going to be useless for a while, she said with frustration, as she struggled to start the fire using the flint and steel Jonas had given her. I have so much to learn. You will learn, Jonas said, and you are not useless. You have other skills. What use is teaching grammar in the wilderness? Eleanor asked, but there was humor in her voice. You could teach me, Jonas said. I never had much schooling, can barely write my name. Eleanor looked surprised. But you understood my letters. They were not written simply. I can read well enough, Jonas said. A chaplain in the war taught me. But writing is different, and there's probably a lot I do not know that you could teach me. Eleanor smiled, and it transformed her serious face into something radiant. I would like that. Teaching you, I mean, though I have a feeling you will have to teach me far more than I teach you. They ate a simple meal of salt pork and beans, and Jonas brewed coffee over the fire. Eleanor tried it and made a face at the bitterness, but she drank it anyway. You will need strong coffee up here, Jonas said with amusement. Winter mornings are cold. Winter, Eleanor repeated. I had not thought that far ahead. It comes early in the mountains, Jonas warned. First snow usually hits in October, sometimes September. We get snowed in for weeks at a time. Snowed in, Eleanor said slowly, as in trapped in the cabin together with no one else for miles. Yes, Jonas said, watching her reaction. Does that frighten you? Eleanor was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. No, she said finally. It should, but it does not. Being trapped with other people in the city frightened me. Being trapped with you in those mountains just sounds peaceful. They spread their bedrolls near the fire, and again Eleanor took Jonas's hand before falling asleep. This time, Jonas slept too, better than he had in years. The second day of riding brought them higher into the mountains. The air grew thinner and cooler, and Eleanor's cheeks flushed pink from the exertion and altitude, but she never complained, just kept riding, her eyes taking in everything. There, Jonas said in the late afternoon, pointing ahead. That valley is mine. The cabin is just beyond that rise. Eleanor urged her horse forward, eager now, and Jonas followed, watching her reaction. They crested the rise, and there it was, his cabin, small and sturdy, with smoke already curling from the chimney. Wait. No. There should not be smoke. Jonas immediately moved in front of Eleanor, his hand going to the rifle secured to his saddle. Stay here, he said quietly. What is wrong? Eleanor asked, tension in her voice. Someone is in my cabin, Jonas said. Should not be anyone out here. He approached slowly, his body tense and ready, but before he reached the door, it swung open, and a familiar figure emerged. Jonas? The man was younger, maybe 25, with sandy hair and a friendly face. I saw you coming up the valley. Figured I would warm the place up for you. Jonas relaxed slightly. Charlie, what are you doing here? Charlie Wilson was a trapper who worked the mountains to the north. He and Jonas had an understanding. They helped each other out when needed, but respected each other's territory and solitude. Passed through 3 days ago and saw you had cleared out your cabin pretty thoroughly, Charlie said. Figured something was up. Then heard in Redemption Falls yesterday that you had gotten yourself married. Thought I would make sure everything was ready for you to bring your bride home." Jonas felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you." Charlie grinned and looked past Jonas to where Eleanor sat on her horse, watching with cautious curiosity. "Well, do not just stand there. Introduce me to the lady who convinced Jonas Callahan to rejoin civilization." Jonas turned and motioned for Eleanor to join them. She dismounted with only slight stiffness and walked over, her hand instinctively coming to rest on Jonas's arm as she looked at Charlie. "Eleanor, this is Charlie Wilson. He traps to the north. Charlie, this is my wife, Eleanor." "Pleasure to meet you, madam," Charlie said, doffing his hat. "I have to say, you are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the craziest, marrying this mountain man and coming to live out here." "Perhaps a bit of both," Eleanor said with a slight smile. "It is nice to meet you, Mr. Wilson." "Just Charlie," he said. "We do not stand on formality much out here. I have got the fire going and put fresh water in the barrel. Also left some supplies, flour and such, as a wedding present." "That's very kind of you," Eleanor said. Charlie looked between them with obvious curiosity, but was polite enough not to ask too many questions. "I will leave you to settle in," he said. "But if you need anything, I'm usually up north about a day's ride. Jonas knows where to find me." After Charlie left, Jonas and Eleanor stood together looking at the cabin. It suddenly seemed very small to Jonas, very rough. What had he been thinking, bringing a city woman to this isolated place? "It is perfect," Eleanor said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "It is rough," Jonas said, "nothing like what you're used to." "It is ours," Eleanor corrected him, "and that makes it perfect." She walked to the door and pushed it open, stepping inside. Jonas followed, seeing the space through her eyes, the single room dominated by the stone fireplace where Charlie's fire crackled, the rough furniture, the bare skin on the bed, the small window that let in golden afternoon light. Eleanor moved slowly through the space, touching things, the table, the chairs, the iron pot hanging near the fire. She went to the window and looked out at the view of the mountains, and Jonas saw her shoulders relax. "I can breathe here," she said quietly. "For the first time in so long, I feel like I can truly breathe." Jonas set her trunk down near the bed and busied himself bringing in their other supplies. When everything was unloaded and the horses were settled in the small stable he had built, he came back inside to find Eleanor kneeling by her trunk, pulling out her few possessions. "The bed is yours," Jonas said. "I can sleep on the floor." Eleanor looked up at him. "How long do you plan to sleep on the floor?" "As long as you need," Jonas said. "That seems impractical for a winter in the mountains," Eleanor said carefully. "Perhaps we could share the bed as we did at the hotel, just sleeping until I am ready for more?" Jonas nodded, relief washing through him. "That would be fine." They spent the evening in comfortable quiet. Jonas showed Eleanor where things were kept, how the fire worked, where the stream was for washing. They ate a simple dinner of the stew Charlie had left warming by the fire, and Eleanor unpacked her belongings, a few dresses, some books, writing materials, a small clock that had belonged to her father. As darkness fell and the fire burned low, they prepared for bed. Jonas stepped outside to give Eleanor privacy to change, and when he returned, she was wearing a simple white nightgown, her brown hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, less serious, and Jonas felt his heart clench. "You can turn around," she said softly. "I am decent." They lay down together in the bed, which was just barely large enough for two people, especially when one of them was as large as Jonas. Eleanor curled on her side facing him, and in the dim firelight, her gray eyes were luminous. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Jonas asked. "For reading my letters, for coming to meet me, for giving me this chance." She paused, then added, "For being patient with me." "You crossed a continent on faith," Jonas said. "I can wait as long as you need." Eleanor reached out and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "I do not think I will need to wait very long," she said quietly. "You are not who I expected, Jonas Callahan. You are better." Jonas caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, feeling her shiver at the touch. "Sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow we can start figuring out how to live together." "I think we already are," Eleanor murmured, her eyes drifting closed. Jonas lay awake, listening to her breathe, feeling the warmth of her body next to his. For 8 years he had been alone in this cabin, convinced that was how it had to be. Now, with Eleanor beside him, the solitude felt like a half-forgotten dream. He had read her letters dozens of times, had memorized her words, had built an image of her in his mind. But the reality was so much better than the imagination. She was real and solid and brave, and she was his wife. Jonas finally fell asleep with a smile on his face, something that had not happened in more years than he could count. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Eleanor threw herself into learning mountain life with the same determination she had brought to teaching. Jonas showed her how to work the garden plot he maintained behind the cabin, how to preserve meat, how to bake bread in the Dutch oven, how to identify edible plants and dangerous animals. She was not naturally gifted at physical labor, and her hands blistered and her muscles ached, but she never complained. Jonas found himself constantly impressed by her stubbornness, the way she would attempt something again and again until she mastered it. In return, Eleanor taught him things he had not realized he was missing. She read aloud to him in the evenings from her precious books, poetry and Shakespeare and adventure novels. She corrected his grammar gently when he spoke and started teaching him to write more than just his name, showing him how to form letters properly. "You have good penmanship for someone who claims he cannot write," she said one evening, watching him practice. "I am copying what you showed me," Jonas said. "That is different from coming up with the words myself." "Then practice with words you know," Eleanor suggested. "Write about your day, about the mountains, about anything you want." So Jonas tried, his large hands clumsy with the pen, but Eleanor praised his efforts and made him feel less foolish. Slowly, the words came easier. They were learning each other too, in small ways. Jonas discovered that Eleanor hummed when she was concentrating, that she loved the mornings best, that she was afraid of spiders but not of bears. Eleanor learned that Jonas moved silently despite his size, that he had nightmares sometimes but refused to talk about them, that he was far gentler than his appearance suggested. The physical distance between them was slowly closing. At first, they had slept with careful space between them in the bed. Then, Eleanor started falling asleep closer, her hand finding his in the darkness. Then she began curling against his side, seeking his warmth. Jonas held her carefully, afraid to push, but increasingly aware of how much he wanted her. One night, about a month after their arrival at the cabin, Eleanor woke him with her hand on his chest. He opened his eyes to find her propped on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight that streamed through the window. "Jonas," she whispered, "I am ready, if you still want me." "I have wanted you since I read your first letter," Jonas admitted, his voice rough with sleep and desire. "Then show me," Eleanor said. Jonas rolled to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "I will be gentle," he promised. "If anything hurts or frightens you, tell me, and I will stop." "I trust you," Eleanor said simply. Their first time together was tender and slow, Jonas taking infinite care with her inexperience, Eleanor responding to his touch with wonder and growing passion. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, and Jonas felt something fundamental shift inside him. "I love you," he said into the darkness, the words surprising him. He had not planned to say them, had not even realized he was thinking them, but they felt right once spoken. Eleanor lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining with tears. "I have loved you since your 10th letter," she whispered. "Maybe before. I loved the man I imagined you to be, but I love the real you even more." "I never wrote you a letter," Jonas said, confused. "The letters you did not write," Eleanor explained. "Each one I sent and you did not respond to was a kind of answer. It told me you were reading them, thinking about them, but did not have the words to respond. That was its own kind of communication." Jonas kissed her again, marveling at how she could take his silence, which he had always seen as a failing, and turn it into something meaningful. "You are too clever for me," he murmured against her lips. "Not too clever," Eleanor said, "just clever enough." They made love again, less carefully this time, and Eleanor proved to be as brave in passion as she was in everything else. Jonas had never felt so connected to another person, had never imagined he could. The summer passed in golden days that seemed too perfect to be real. Jonas took Eleanor on hikes through the mountains, showing her hidden waterfalls and meadows carpeted with wildflowers. She collected samples of plants she found interesting, pressing them between the pages of her books. They fished in the streams, swam in the cold mountain lakes, lay together in the grass watching clouds drift past the peaks. Charlie visited twice more, bringing news from the territory and supplies they could not make themselves. He seemed delighted that Jonas had found happiness, and he treated Eleanor with friendly respect that made Jonas grateful for the friendship. "She is good for you," Charlie said one afternoon while Eleanor was down at the stream washing clothes. "I have never seen you so relaxed." "I did not know I could be," Jonas admitted. "The war messed a lot of us up," Charlie said quietly. He had fought too, though in different battles. "But maybe we do not have to stay messed up forever. Maybe the right person can help us heal." Jonas thought about that after Charlie left. He had not talked to Eleanor about the war, about the things he had seen and done, about the reasons he had fled to these mountains. But she was patient, never pushing, and slowly he found himself telling her things he had never told anyone. It started one night when he woke from a nightmare, gasping and disoriented. Eleanor was there immediately, her hands on his face, her voice calm and steady. "You are safe," she said. "You are home. You are with me." Jonas clung to her, his heart racing, and gradually the images faded. When he could breathe normally again, Eleanor asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" And surprisingly, he did. He told her about Gettysburg, about his brother dying in his arms, about the endless noise and blood and death. He told her about coming home and feeling like a ghost, about the woman who had looked at him with horror instead of love. He told her about choosing the mountains because they were empty of memories. Eleanor listened to all of it, her arms around him, and when he finished, she said, "Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with it." "It does not bother you?" Jonas asked, "knowing what I have done?" "You were a soldier," Eleanor said firmly. "You did what you had to do to survive a terrible situation. That does not make you broken, Jonas. It makes you human." "I have killed men," Jonas said, needing her to understand. "More than I can count." "In war," Eleanor said, "not for pleasure or cruelty. And you have spent the last 8 years trying to atone for it, trying to live a peaceful life. I do not judge you for your past. I love you for who you are now." Jonas held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "How did I get so lucky?" he whispered. "It was not luck," Eleanor said. "It was 12 letters and a great deal of hope, and you showing up to meet me despite 8 years of telling yourself you wanted to be alone." As summer faded into autumn, Jonas began preparing for winter. He cut and stacked firewood, repaired any weak spots in the cabin, hunted and preserved meat. Eleanor helped with all of it, her hands growing rough with work, but her spirit undimmed. One afternoon in late September, as they worked together stacking firewood, Eleanor suddenly stopped and pressed a hand to her stomach. "Are you all right?" Jonas asked immediately. Eleanor looked up at him with a strange expression, somewhere between shocked and delighted. "I think I might be pregnant," she whispered. Jonas felt his heart stop. "Are you sure?" "Not completely," Eleanor admitted, "but I have missed my monthly time, and I have been feeling strange in the mornings, light-headed and nauseous." Jonas set down the wood he was holding and pulled Eleanor into his arms. "A baby," he said, trying to process it. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy about it?" Eleanor asked anxiously. "I know we have only been married a few months, and this was not planned." "I am terrified," Jonas interrupted her, "and more happy than I have any right to be." Eleanor laughed, the sound bright in the mountain air. "I am terrified too, but also excited. A child, Jonas, our child." They held each other in the autumn sunshine, surrounded by mountains and firewood and the life they were building together. Jonas thought about Eleanor's letters, about how she had written to him for a year before arriving, how he had read each one at least 7 times, how those words on paper had led to this moment, to a wife he loved and a child on the way. "When will the baby come?" he asked. "If I am right about when it happened, probably May," Eleanor said. "Late spring." "Before the pass is clear," Jonas said, his mind already working through the logistics. "We will be snowed in." Eleanor paled slightly. "I had not thought of that. Should we go to Redemption Falls before the snow comes? Stay there until after the birth?" Jonas considered it. It would be safer, having the doctor and other women nearby for the birth, but it would also mean leaving their home, living in town for months. And he could see in Eleanor's face that she did not want that any more than he did. "We will prepare," he said finally. I will ride to town before the first snow, get supplies, and talk to the doctor about what we will need. And you are strong, Eleanor. We will manage. Together, Eleanor said firmly. Together, Jonas agreed. He made the trip to Redemption Falls in mid-October before the weather turned. He spoke at length with Dr. Harrison, a gruff but competent man who had delivered dozens of babies on the frontier. The doctor gave him a list of supplies and instructions and made Jonas promise to come get him if there were any complications, weather be damned. Jonas also spoke with Mrs. Patterson, who had raised 6 children of her own, and seemed touched that he would ask for her advice. She put together a package of baby clothes and blankets, refusing payment, and told him that Eleanor was welcome to stay with her when the time came if they changed their minds about the mountain cabin. "That woman of yours has grit," Mrs. Patterson said. "Coming out here to marry you sight unseen, having a baby in the wilderness. Not many city girls would have the spine for it." "She is stronger than she looks," Jonas said with pride. He returned to the cabin loaded down with supplies and reassurances, finding Eleanor anxious for his return. She threw herself into his arms the moment he dismounted, and Jonas held her tightly. "I missed you," she said. 2 days felt like forever. "I missed you too," Jonas admitted. "The cabin felt empty without you." They spent the evening going through the supplies and talking about the baby. Eleanor was now sure she was pregnant, and her excitement was contagious. She talked about names and wondered whether it would be a boy or a girl, made plans for where the cradle would go. "I want to teach our child to read early," she said, "and to love books the way I do." "I want to teach them about the mountains," Jonas said, "how to track and hunt and survive." "A child of both our worlds," Eleanor said with a smile, "city and wilderness." "A mountain child," Jonas corrected, "born free." The first snow came in early November, just a dusting that melted by afternoon. But heavier snows followed, and by December they were well and truly snowed in. The cabin became their entire world, cozy and warm despite the cold outside. Jonas had worried that Eleanor might grow restless or lonely, trapped inside for weeks at a time. But she seemed to thrive in the isolation. She read, she taught Jonas more about writing, she sewed baby clothes by the fire. Her belly swelled steadily, and Jonas found himself constantly amazed by the evidence of life growing inside her. "Can you feel the baby move?" he asked one evening, his hand resting on her stomach. "All the time now," Eleanor said, "especially at night. I think we have a restless one." As if in answer, Jonas felt a small flutter under his palm, and his eyes widened. "That was the baby." "That was our baby," Eleanor confirmed, laughing at his expression. Jonas pressed his face to her belly, speaking softly. "I am your father," he said, "and I cannot wait to meet you. Your mother and I have been preparing for you. We have clothes and blankets and a cradle I built myself, and we will teach you everything we know about how to live a good life in these mountains." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and she stroked Jonas's hair. "You are going to be a wonderful father," she whispered. "I hope so," Jonas said, lifting his head to look at her. "I'm terrified of doing it wrong." "We will do it together," Eleanor said, echoing the words they had spoken so many times over the months, "and we will figure it out as we go." The winter passed slowly but peacefully. Jonas hunted when the weather allowed, bringing back deer and rabbits and the occasional elk. Eleanor cooked and kept the cabin warm and comfortable. They talked for hours, learning new things about each other every day. Jonas finally told Eleanor about all his fears, about failing her and the baby, about not being enough. And Eleanor told him about her own fears, about childbirth and motherhood, and whether she would be adequate to the task of raising a child in such isolation. "We will be enough," Jonas said, "because we have each other." In March, as the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, Eleanor's pregnancy became more difficult. She was tired all the time, her back ached, and simple tasks exhausted her. Jonas took over all the physical work, insisting she rest as much as possible. "I feel useless," Eleanor complained one afternoon. "You are growing a human being," Jonas said firmly. "That is the opposite of useless." One night in late April, Jonas woke to find Eleanor sitting up in bed, breathing carefully through obvious pain. "The baby?" he asked, immediately alert. "I think so," Eleanor said, her face pale. "The pains started about an hour ago. They are getting stronger." Jonas felt panic rise in his chest, but he forced it down. Eleanor needed him to be calm, to be strong. What do you need me to do?" Over the next 12 hours, Jonas discovered new depths of his own helplessness. He followed the doctor's instructions as best he could, boiling water and preparing the birthing area, but mostly he could only hold Eleanor's hand and watch her suffer through the pain of labor. Eleanor was incredibly brave, bearing the contractions with gritted teeth and determination. But as the hours wore on and the pain intensified, Jonas saw her strength begin to waver. "I cannot do this," she gasped during a particularly hard contraction. "It is too much." "Yes, you can," Jonas said firmly, gripping her hand. "You are the bravest person I know, Eleanor. You crossed a continent to marry a stranger. You built a life in the wilderness. You can do this." "You have to do it," he continued when she shook her head. "Because I need you. Our baby needs you. And you did not come all this way, write me all those letters, survive all those months of uncertainty, just to give up now." Eleanor looked at him with eyes that were exhausted but fierce. "If I can do this, you have to promise me something." "Anything," Jonas said. "Promise me that if anything happens to me, you will not shut down again. You will not go back to being alone. You will raise our child and let people into your life and keep living." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Jonas said, fear making his voice rough. "Promise me," Eleanor insisted. "I promise," Jonas said. "But you are going to be fine. Both of you." The baby came just before dawn, a squalling, red-faced boy with a strong set of lungs. Jonas caught him in shaking hands, barely believing what he was seeing, and carefully laid the baby on Eleanor's chest. Eleanor was exhausted, drenched in sweat, but her face was radiant as she looked down at their son. "He is perfect," she whispered. Jonas could not speak, his throat tight with emotion. He had seen death so many times in his life, had caused it himself on the battlefield. But watching his son enter the world, seeing this new life that he and Eleanor had created together, was the most profound experience of his existence. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked softly. Jonas thought about all the people who had helped bring them to this moment. About Reverend Matthews, who had brought Eleanor to him, about Charlie, who had become a good friend, about Eleanor's father, who had raised a daughter brave enough to risk everything for freedom. "Samuel," he said, remembering that Eleanor's father had been named Samuel. "Samuel Callahan." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "My father would have loved that. He would have loved you." Little Samuel proved to be as strong-willed as his mother. He nursed enthusiastically, slept fitfully, and demanded attention with lung power that echoed through the cabin. Jonas was terrified of holding him at first, afraid his large hands would hurt the tiny baby. But Eleanor placed Samuel in his arms and showed him how to support the baby's head. "You will not break him," she said with amusement. "He is tougher than he looks." Jonas looked down at his son, at the tiny face and miniature hands, and felt his heart crack open in a way he had not thought possible. "I love you," he whispered to Samuel. "I will protect you with my life." The spring and summer passed in a blur of sleepless nights and new discoveries. Jonas and Eleanor learned how to be parents together, making mistakes and figuring things out as they went. Samuel grew quickly, his eyes eventually settling into a gray blue that matched his mother's. Charlie visited in June and was utterly charmed by the baby. "Never thought I would see Jonas Callahan as a family man," he said, bouncing Samuel gently. "But it suits you." "I never thought I would either," Jonas admitted. "But here we are." By Samuel's first birthday, the cabin had truly become a home. There were baby things scattered everywhere, the sound of laughter mixed with crying, the constant activity of a young child learning to walk and explore. The solitude Jonas had once craved seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the chaotic love of family life. Eleanor thrived as a mother, patient and nurturing, but also firm when needed. She read to Samuel constantly, started teaching him words before he could even speak them. Jonas taught him about the mountains, taking him on short walks to see the deer and birds, showing him how to track animals in the soft dirt. One evening, as they sat together watching Samuel play on the floor with wooden blocks Jonas had carved for him, Eleanor turned to Jonas with a thoughtful expression. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Truly happy?" Jonas considered the question seriously. A year ago, he would have said he did not need happiness, that contentment and survival were enough. But now, looking at his wife and son, at the life they had built together in these mountains, he realized he had never been happier. "More than I ever thought possible," he said honestly. You wrote in one of your letters that you wanted to be free. Are you? Free and happy? Eleanor smiled, that radiant expression that still made Jonas's heart skip. I am both, she said. I am exactly who I wanted to be, living exactly the life I hoped for. Better than I hoped for, actually, because I have you and Samuel. All because you were brave enough to write those letters, Jonas said. And you were brave enough to read them, Eleanor added, and to come meet me even though you were terrified. I was not terrified, Jonas protested, but Eleanor laughed. You were terrified, she said. I could see it in your eyes that first day in Redemption Falls, but you came anyway. That is what courage is. Over the next few years, their family grew. A daughter, Rose, was born when Samuel was 2, with her father's dark hair and serious disposition. Then, another son, Matthew, arrived 2 years after that, completing their family. The cabin expanded too, Jonas building additional rooms to accommodate everyone. What had once been a solitary refuge became a bustling household full of noise and love and life. Eleanor taught all the children to read and write, and Jonas taught them to respect and understand the wilderness that was their home. They were not completely isolated. Charlie remained a regular visitor and a beloved uncle figure to the children. Other families had begun settling in the area, and a small community formed, though spread out across the mountains. Eleanor started a small school, teaching not just her own children, but several others whose families lived within a day's ride. Jonas found that he did not mind the gradual encroachment of civilization as much as he had thought he would. The mountains were large enough for everyone, and having neighbors meant help when needed and company for Eleanor and the children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jonas took Eleanor on a ride up to a high meadow he had discovered shortly after their marriage. They left the children with Charlie for the day and spent the afternoon together in the place where wildflowers still bloomed in impossible profusion. I have something for you, Jonas said, pulling a carefully wrapped package from his saddlebag. Eleanor opened it to find a leather-bound journal, the pages blank and waiting. Jonas, this is beautiful. Where did you get it? I ordered it from Denver, Jonas said. Took 6 months to arrive. I thought maybe you could write in it. About our life here, about the children, about anything you want. Your letters to me changed my life. Maybe these writings will be something we can pass down to Samuel and Rose and Matthew someday. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and she kissed him deeply. I love it, and I love you, more than I could ever put into words. You put it into words just fine 10 years ago, Jonas said. 12 letters that told me everything I needed to know. I was so nervous writing those letters, Eleanor confessed. I kept thinking you would read them and think I was foolish or desperate, or I thought you were brave, Jonas interrupted, and honest, and worth crossing any distance to meet. They made love there in the meadow, in the sunshine and wildflowers, and with the same passion they had shared on their wedding night, but with a deeper connection forged through years of partnership and love. Afterward, lying in Jonas's arms, Eleanor said, Do you ever miss the solitude, the way things were before I arrived? Jonas was quiet for a moment, thinking about the man he had been a decade ago, hollow and haunted, living alone in the mountains because he could not face the world or himself. That man seemed like a stranger now. No, he said firmly. That was not living, Eleanor. That was just existing. You taught me the difference. We taught each other, Eleanor corrected. You taught me that I could be strong, that I did not need the city or society's approval to have a good life. I was so afraid when I wrote those first letters, so uncertain, but you gave me courage. You gave me life, Jonas said simply. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in gold and orange, they rode back down to the cabin, where their children were undoubtedly driving Charlie to distraction. But even the thought of the chaos that awaited them made Jonas smile. This was home. This was family. This was everything he had never known he needed. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew into a strong, quiet young man who loved the mountains as much as his father. Rose proved to have her mother's intelligence and love of learning, devouring every book she could get her hands on. Matthew was the wild one, always exploring, always testing boundaries, giving his parents more than a few gray hairs. Eleanor continued teaching, and her school became a fixture of the small mountain community. Jonas built a larger building for it, and children came from miles around to learn. He was immensely proud of his wife, of the way she had taken her gifts and used them to better the lives of everyone around her. He had started writing too, painstakingly recording stories of their life in the mountains, of their children's adventures, of the history of the area. His handwriting was still rough compared to Eleanor's elegant script, but the words were his own, and that mattered. One winter evening, when Samuel was 15 and the other children were finally asleep, Jonas and Eleanor sat together by the fire, as they had done countless times over the years. Eleanor was mending one of Matthew's shirts, and Jonas was working on his writing. "Read me what you wrote," Eleanor said, setting down her mending. Jonas felt self-conscious, as he always did when sharing his writing, but he read aloud. "I was a man who thought he had nothing left to give or receive. The war had taken too much, and I chose the mountains because they asked for nothing. Then letters started arriving, 12 of them, written by a woman brave enough to cross a continent on hope alone. I read each letter at least 7 times, memorizing the words of this stranger who somehow understood me better than people I had known my whole life. When she finally arrived, tired and uncertain but still brave, I knew my life would never be the same. And I was right. She gave me everything I did not know I was missing. Love, family, purpose, joy. She gave me life." Eleanor was crying quietly, and Jonas set down his writing to pull her into his arms. "Why tears?" he asked gently. "Happy tears," Eleanor said. "I was just thinking about that frightened girl who sat in a boarding house in Philadelphia, writing letters to a man she had never met, hoping he might save her, and how it turned out she did not need saving at all. She just needed someone to believe in her, to give her a chance to save herself." "We saved each other," Jonas said. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "We did." They sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the fire crackle and the wind whistle outside, comfortable in the life they had built. Jonas thought about how different things might have been if Eleanor had never written those letters, or if he had thrown them away unread, or if he had not been brave enough to meet her in Redemption Falls that day. But she had written them. He had read them over and over until her words became part of him, and he had shown up, terrified but determined, to meet the woman who had somehow seen through his isolation to the man underneath. "Thank you," Jonas said quietly. "For what?" Eleanor asked. "For the letters? For coming here? For choosing me? For all of it?" Eleanor kissed him softly. "Thank you for reading them. For meeting me. For building this life with me. For loving me." "Always," Jonas promised, "for the rest of my life and whatever comes after." The children eventually grew up and started lives of their own. Samuel built a cabin on the far side of the valley and married a girl from one of the neighboring families. Rose went to Denver for advanced schooling, returning summers to teach at her mother's school and eventually starting her own in a growing town to the south. Matthew became a guide, leading expeditions through the mountains, his wild spirit finding purpose in helping others experience the wilderness he loved. Jonas and Eleanor remained in their cabin, growing older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Jonas's hair turned fully gray, and his body, while still strong, carried the aches of a life lived hard. Eleanor's face gained lines, but her gray eyes remained as serious and beautiful as ever. They became the elders of their small mountain community, the couple everyone turned to for advice and wisdom. Jonas found that he did not mind people anymore, had even come to enjoy the company of neighbors and friends. But he still treasured the quiet moments alone with Eleanor, the walks through the mountains, the evenings by the fire. On a warm summer evening, when Jonas was 60 and Eleanor 52, they sat together on the porch Jonas had built years earlier, watching the sun set over the peaks. Their grandchildren, Samuel's children, were playing in the meadow nearby under their father's watchful eye. "Do you ever think about where we might be if I had not written those letters?" Eleanor asked. Jonas considered the question. "You would have found another way," he said. "You are too strong, too determined to have stayed trapped. You would have made a different life, maybe not in these mountains, but somewhere." "And you?" Eleanor pressed. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. "I would probably still be here," he admitted. "But I would be alone, still existing but not living. still haunted by the past, still convinced I had nothing to offer anyone. "I'm glad I was brave enough to write them," Eleanor said softly. "I am glad I was brave enough to read them," Jonas replied, "and to read them again and again. 7 times at least for each one, probably more." Eleanor laughed, the sound still as bright and warm as it had been 20 years earlier. "You were certainly thorough. I thought maybe you were ignoring them, but you were memorizing them." "I was trying to understand you," Jonas said, "trying to figure out if you were real or too good to be true. Turns out you were real and too good to be true." "Flatterer," Eleanor said, but she was smiling. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors and their grandchildren's laughter echoed across the valley. This was the life they had built together, starting from nothing but letters and hope. "Jonas," Eleanor said after a while, her voice serious, "if something happens to me, I want you to promise me something." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Jonas said automatically, though they both knew that was not a promise he could make. "Promise me you will not go back to being alone," Eleanor said. "The children will want to take care of you, and you should let them. You should stay connected to people, to life. You have learned how to live again, and I need to know you will not forget." Jonas squeezed her hand. "I could never forget what you taught me, but nothing is going to happen to you. We are going to grow old together, right here in these mountains, surrounded by our family." "Good," Eleanor said, leaning her head on his shoulder, "because I am not ready to leave you yet. I want many more years of this." "Many more," Jonas agreed, kissing the top of her head. As it turned out, they got their wish. They had 15 more years together, years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with continued teaching and writing and living. They watched their community grow and thrive, watched their children raise families of their own, watched the wild mountains gradually become a little less wild, but no less beautiful. Eleanor died peacefully in her sleep at 67, with Jonas holding her hand and her family surrounding her bed. Jonas felt the loss like a physical wound, a tearing away of part of himself. But he kept his promise to her. He did not retreat into isolation, did not push away the love and concern of his children and grandchildren. He lived another 8 years after Eleanor's death, staying in the cabin they had shared, writing down every memory he had of their life together. He made sure their story was preserved, the tale of the letters that had brought them together, the love that had flourished in the mountains, the family they had built from nothing but courage and hope. Jonas died at the age of 83, sitting in his chair by the fire, his journal open in his lap. Samuel found him there the next morning, peaceful and still, finally reunited with the woman who had changed his life with 12 letters and a heart brave enough to follow them. The journal became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through generations. Samuel kept the original letters too, the ones his mother had written to his father, carefully preserved in their leather pouch. The pages were soft from handling, evidence of how many times Jonas had read them, and the words remained as powerful as ever. Samuel's children, and their children after them, grew up hearing the story of how their grandmother had written to a mountain man she had never met, how she had been brave enough to cross a continent on nothing but hope, and how that mountain man had read her letters over and over, at least 7 times each, until he understood what his life could be if he let someone in. It became the family's legend, a reminder that courage could come in many forms. Sometimes it was the courage to put your hope in words and send them into the unknown. Sometimes it was the courage to read those words and believe in possibility. And sometimes it was the courage to show up, to take the risk, to build something beautiful from the ashes of a broken past. The cabin still stood in its valley, renovated and expanded over the years, but recognizably the same structure Jonas had built with his own hands so many decades earlier. It remained in the family, each generation appreciating the history within its walls, the love story that had started there, the proof that even the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. And in the family's collection of treasured items, protected and preserved, were 12 letters written in elegant script on cream-colored paper, each one a testament to the power of hope and the transformative nature of love. They had been read at least 7 times each, probably many more, by a man who had thought he had nothing left to offer the world. Those letters had proven him wrong. They had brought him a wife, a family, a life worth living. They had turned a mountain man's solitary existence into something rich and full and beautiful. They had shown two people that courage and hope, when combined with genuine love, could create miracles. The legacy of Jonas and Eleanor Callahan lived on in the mountains they had loved, in the community they had helped build, and most importantly, in the family they had created. Their story was proof that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with a dramatic gesture, but with a simple act of bravery, putting pen to paper and daring to hope for something better. And sometimes, the greatest response to such bravery is equally simple: reading those words, treasuring them, and having the courage to show up and say yes to the possibility they represent. In the end, that was what Jonas and Eleanor's story was about. Not just the romance of a mountain man and a city woman, though that was certainly part of it, but more fundamentally, it was about two broken people who found each other through words and faith, who built something beautiful in the wilderness, who proved that it is never too late to start over, to love, to live. Their story was about courage. Eleanor's courage in writing those letters and making the journey west, Jonas's courage in reading them and letting himself hope again, and the shared courage they found in building a life together despite all the obstacles. It was about hope, the hope that somewhere out there, someone might understand you, might see your worth, might be willing to take a chance on forever. And it was about love, the kind of love that grows slowly through shared words and experiences, that deepens through challenges and triumphs, that endures through decades and continues beyond death in the memories and stories passed down through generations. The mountains remained eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to countless stories of struggle and triumph, love and loss. But among all those stories, the tale of Jonas Callahan and Eleanor Hartwick held a special place, remembered and retold, a reminder that even in the hardest circumstances, even in the wildest places, love could find a way to flourish. It had started with letters, 12 of them, each one read at least 7 times. But it had become so much more: a marriage, a family, a legacy, a love story for the ages. And it all began because one woman was brave enough to write, and one man was brave enough to read, and both of them were brave enough to believe that words on paper could lead to something real and lasting and true. In the end, that faith had been rewarded beyond their wildest dreams. Eleanor had found the freedom she craved, the life of purpose and meaning she had hoped for. Jonas had found healing from his war wounds, not through solitude as he had thought, but through connection and love. Together, they had found happiness, the kind that comes from choosing each other every day, from building something meaningful, from facing challenges side by side. Their story lived on, told and retold around fires in mountain cabins, a testament to the power of courage and the enduring nature of true love. And somewhere in that valley where wildflowers still bloomed and mountains touched the sky, the spirit of their love remained, eternal as the peaks, deep as the valleys, as wild and beautiful as the territory they had called home. It was a story that began with a woman's desperate hope and a man's lonely existence, and ended with a legacy of love that would echo through generations. All because of 12 letters and a mountain man who read each one at least 7 times, until he understood what his heart had been trying to tell him all along, that he was not meant to be alone, that love was still possible, and that sometimes the greatest courage is the willingness to let someone in.